I apologize in advance for the light glare, but you're just gonna have to deal with it because I didn't want to put my contacts in. And I'm reading off a script because I'm very bad at talking off the top of my head. Hey guys, so as some of you know, I have an African dwarf frog named Sugar, who I got originally to help entertain me at college, but I did realize a bit later that at local Petsmarts, the care guides they have for my little guys look a bit different depending on the location I got them from. I can show you right here. So I'd been a bit confused with the first care guide I found at a Petsmart close to my college that showed this chunky boy who is very much so not one of the teeny guys that I have. So the first question I have is that I don't know what this frog is. From looking at the kinds of frogs offered at PetSmart online at the time to in-store, he's not on there. So if you guys know what it is, let me know. Reddit told me that it was a wood frog, and I looked at some pictures of that, and it looks kind of accurate, but more opinions is better. But yeah, I'm looking at these two different guides, and they are in fact more different than just the picture on the front. And they have different instructions for care for supposedly the same animal. Like, come on, PetSmart, why you gotta do this to us? I just wanted to know how to take care of my aquatic bugger. And you can't even do that right, even though you have a PetSmart veterinarian approved care guide for the animal. Starting with the first page on Mystery Frog's care guide. I apologize, I don't have two sets of cameras, so you're gonna have to deal with me. It says that they are also aquatic, these mystery frogs. I'm not sure if wood frogs are fully aquatic, but I know African dwarf frogs are. And I know that also African clawed frogs are, which are slightly different. I say slightly, but I have an African clawed frog too. They are a lot different. Here, let me show you. This guy is so tiny, it is very difficult for my camera to actually focus on him. Here is my thumb for good measure. And he is an adult. This is Gertrude. Gertrude is an adult African clawed frog. She has laid eggs again, as you can see, so she's had a lovely snack today, along with her normal food. Here is my hand for reference. It's kind of squished over here. She's about the size of my hand. I have small hands, but like that's pretty significant, if you ask me. Yeah, so they look a bit different as well. Now, as you can see there, Gertrude has quite a few less brain cells than whoever this guy is. So they are obviously a different species. But there is an immediate difference even in the two arbitrary adjectives that they use to describe these two different care guides. I apologize for the cut. My dog got lonely outside, so she is now sniffing around the fish tanks in here. As I was saying, Mystery Frog is described as being small and splashy, whereas dwarf frogs are small and spectacular. Which sounds a lot like Mystery Frog is supposed to be a clawed frog, since Gertrude is so freaking massive. Of course, they usually just sell young clawed frogs at pet stores I've gone to, so if this is a misprint of clawed frogs, I would say it's a tad misleading. They get big. With small and spectacular, it just seems like they don't know another positive adjective for an African dwarf frog, so they went with, well, they're spectacular, so you should buy them. I would go with small and curious myself, pro tip to PetSmart, but that's just with Sugar, because he'll sometimes try and follow my finger and bite it if he feels like it. So starting with the important facts on the top of the page, the African dwarf frogs are listed as beginner pets that can grow up to 1.5 inches long and live 5 to 7 years, which I've found to be fairly accurate in the past, but I don't have the most experience. It says they can live in community tanks as long as nothing can eat them or they can't eat anything. I know this is somewhat controversial in the African dwarf frog Facebook groups, but I think it just depends on the personalities of the individual animals you're keeping. If you like have fish or frogs before, you'll know that they have personalities and things they like to eat and things they don't like to eat. So I have my dwarf frog with snails right now. He's done fine. I know there is like a possibility that like an arm could get caught in the snail's shell when he's retracting, but my snail just does not care. And I've had him with a beta in the past, but I asked the person who I got the beta from if he had lived with dwarf frogs in the past, and she said yes, and they got along just fine. He was very laid back for a beta fish though. There are also enough hides in my tank so that the animals never really have to be around each other unless they want to, so I'd say that this is pretty decent information. For mystery frog, it lists African dwarf frogs as an intermediate level pet that can grow up to 3 inches long and live up to 15 years. Which is a bit misleading since I know the only African dwarf frog that they have is the one that I bought there. If I was a first-time African dwarf frog owner and I grabbed this information, I'd be very wrong in what I'd be expecting long-term with this animal. Sugar is very small, he is definitely not 3 inches long, and he is definitely an adult. And I've heard that African dwarf frogs can live a very long time, but on average, I don't think that you should expect them to live 15 years. So underneath this is the Petsmart recommended setup for ADFs, and again, these are different. So the ADF one shows one frog in a 5-gallon with an illuminated hood, which helps with simulating a day-night cycle, a filter, a thermometer, substrate, a hide, plants, and a heater. The Mystery Frogs Care Guide showed something similar, with a 10-gallon tank and some community fish added, but for some reason says Decker or hides instead of just hides, and gravel instead of gravel or sand. I'm not sure about Mystery Frog, but from what I know about African dwarf frogs, I'd agree with the sand or gravel as long as they're used to living on that substrate and don't try to eat it like an idiot. Again, this depends on frog to frog. They can get impacted if they eat too much or they have gravel that's too small and they can fit in their mouths. And I've seen horror story pictures from like African clawed frogs going to the vet and having just like so much gravel impaction. But for the mystery frog, I have a gripe with the phrase Decker and hiding because for the ADF, it just says you need a hide. And I don't know about you, but I've seen many aquarium decorations that wouldn't exactly qualify as a hide. And for both of them, I don't understand why you need fake plants. Honestly, fake plant requirements just seem like a way to get people to buy something else they don't need. Yes, it is cool if your frogs can have something to sit and hide in, but if you have, like, nice hides, then they just fulfill the similar purpose. Of course, I myself have real plants, but that's just because Anacharis is really easy to grow. On the next page, more aquarium suggestions are given. The first bullet point for both of them say kind of the same thing, whereas this one, the ADF one, says a 5-gallon aquarium can comfortably house 1 to 2 ADFs. For more than 2, and with community fish, use at least a 20-gallon, and 1 or 2 ADFs can live happily in a 5-gallon aquarium. If you plan to house more than 2 frogs and or fish, use a 20-gallon aquarium or larger, which is kind of puzzling to me. They say the exact same thing even for these 2 different frogs that do have a small but real size difference. And I'm not even going to go into some people's belief that a person should have 5 gallons for each frog in a given aquarium. Another weird thing about that is this one says 5-gallon aquarium for 1 to 2, but it has a 10-gallon aquarium over here, so that's weird. It makes me think again that this infographic was used for a clawed frog because the absolute minimum size for an adult African clawed frog is 10 gallons, but you cannot put more than one African clawed frog in a 5-gallon. That would just be crazy. Oh, hi! This is my dog. You can't. Oh, there she is. Boop. Okay. So the next bullet point is the same, only the ADF's pamphlet says to vacuum the substrate once a week while the Mystery Frogs doesn't. I can show you if you want. There we go. Feel free to pause this and read them all if you'd like. I don't want to keep pulling them up and down, but also I don't want to shove my camera up there. I say camera, it's my phone. I don't want to shove my phone in my bed. Mystery Frog instead calls for weekly and monthly water changes that the ADF's pamphlet does not have. Apparently, you just need to utilize one form of cleaning for each frog, which is definitely not true. You should not do that. Any aquarium you have, you should at least do partial water changes somewhat regularly for the health of your animals. I might have to break from their guidelines for this one. Also, only the ADF Care Guide says to put a hide in the tank, despite that both pamphlets say to add hides to their tank. And only the ADF Care Guide says that you need beneficial bacteria to help cycle the tank. From what I've heard from people who work in the herpetile industry, these guys are very hard to establish in a tank at first, so I'd say proper cycling is crucial if you want your little guy to make it past 3 months. And even with proper cycling, things can go wrong. Mystery Frog doesn't have the same issue, apparently. And here's the other one. So something I do really like about these instructions is that it actually tells you to use a net to transfer your frogs to your aquarium after acclimating them, and not to pour the pet water into the tank. At Petsmart, there's usually so many dead animals that you have no clue how they died, so less contaminated water the better. The ideal temperature for both of these African dwarf frog pamphlets is different as well, with the ADF one saying 70 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit, and the Mystery Frog saying 73 to 82 degrees. This isn't too different, thankfully, so no one should get too messed up with these instructions. Next is the what should I feed them section, where, again, there are a couple of sentences that are exactly the same, but the Mystery Frogs pamphlet has a few more words, because why not? Here we go, I can show you. Other than this, though, the feeding directions for both of these supposed African dwarf frogs is different, which I feel could be pretty problematic if a person just consults Petsmart care guides for help, which you should not do. If your ADF is obese, you may think that he has bloat going on, and that is a very scary time because bloat often leads to a dead frog. So the last section is the most baffling to me. If you look ahead at what the bullet points say, they are pretty much identical, save for a few symptoms. But the header is different for some reason, with the ADF pamphlet saying, when should I call a veterinarian? Whereas the Mystery Frog, it says, how can I keep my African dwarf frog healthy? The only difference I see between the two is that the ADF guide's only option is to see a vet, and the Mystery Frog has two: see a vet or ask Petsmart, which I don't think is too reliable, but you do you. Also, I don't think I've ever seen anything about a vet seeing an ADF. I can't imagine how tricky it would be to find an exotics vet who would know how to deal with them, but maybe I'm wrong. I've seen ACFs at the vet, and I would love to see vets who have good info about these guys. Okay, so on the back page there is a shopping list, both listed for African dwarf frogs with different items on the checklist. The Mystery Frog needs a stand for their aquarium despite the ADF not needing one, even though they both say they need 5-gallon tanks. And confusingly, the ADF's pamphlet writes out the word "and", whereas the Mystery Frog uses an ampersand, and honestly, I just really don't understand these little changes at all. Similarly, the Mystery Frog uses parentheses around C associate for best solution, while ADF has a comma before the phrase, which just bugs me as an English major. And finally on the list, the ADF checklist is trying to get the person to buy pellets as well as treat food, and the Mystery Frog has none, despite them both being listed as doing well with treats inside. Pro tip, do not buy your ADF bloodworms, especially freeze-dried as treats. They do love mice as shrimp, though. Save your bloodworms for your betta or your turtle if you're feeling generous. So then we move on to the bottom, and I figure out the biggest difference between these two pamphlets is the copyright date. Mystery Frog is listed as being a 2017 edition, 5 years or 6 years? 6 years out of date at this point. I wrote the script a year ago. And the ADF is listed as a 2021 edition, which is when I got both of these. This final detail leads me to believe that this was just a misprint. This was never supposed to be. But even if it is a misprint, it doesn't explain why they list a different species of frog as the African dwarf frog. I'm fairly certain there hasn't been a new replacement frog discovered between 2017 and 21 that's taken over the title of African dwarf frog from this boy. So I'm still confused as to what the heck is happening and why this was at a Petsmart in 2021, because it is outdated and misleading in pet care. The staff in the facility that had that also told me to feed my ADF freeze-dried bloodworms, so I think the moral of the story is don't listen to Petsmart when you get your frogs. Make sure you look at multiple sources when deciding what care is best for your pet, and talk to professionals. So yeah, that was interesting. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you know who this is, please let me know. I'm assuming it's a wood frog? I don't know the care for a wood frog. Also, that might be cool to know if this is even like the care for a wood frog or if it's an African clawed frog, since I know a lot of people call African dwarf frogs and African clawed frogs the same thing, even though they are very, very different, as I showed you today. Yeah, last thing, if you see these outdated things at PetSmart, don't follow them. Even if they aren't outdated, make sure you corroborate the information in it with other sources that you trust. Like, come on. What is this?